Perek Aleph Halacha Dalet in Hilchos Shvisas Osor. It's a mitzvah saying. There's another one in Yom Kippur, Vihi, and that is Lishbois Boy Ma'achila V'Shio, not to eat or drink. It's a positive commandment. Shenema, it says Tanus Nafshisero. It doesn't say it in a negative language, but rather you shall torment your soul. Now, in the Peirush we have that this is found in Vayikra 16:29, and Ezeu Inui Shehu Lamdu, V'pi Hashmu Lamdu. The Chachamim have this Kabbalah that they received from generation to generation. Ezeu Inui Shehu Lenefesh, what torments the person, the being. Zatzayim, this is fasting. The Maggid Mishnah cites Yuma 74b. The Gemara questions what is tormenting that the Torah requires, and the conclusion is that it's eating and drinking. From the Rambam would seem that the words Tanus Nefesh Seichem is what teaches us this, as the Rambam writes in Sefer HaMitzvahs, the positive commandment 164, that we are commanded to fast on the 10th of Tishrei, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said in the Posuk, Tanus Nefesh Seichem. The explanation of the Posuk is in the Sifra. Tanus Nefesh Seichem, Inui Shehi Ibud Nefesh, a tormentation that is a loss of soul. The Ezehu, in which is it Achila V'Shia, that is eating and drinking. Avinu Manoach explains, eating and drinking, we keeps watch that the body is healthy, and the lack thereof, it causes the lack of the body to be weak. And he cites Yuma, again the same 74b, that they make similar, just like that on Yom Kippur. It says, I will cause the soul to be lost if you transgress Yom Kippur. So that same concept of soul is found as far as Nafshei Sechem, the being of the person, which means that it has a loss of life, which is not eating and drinking. See, Yitzchak writes, Yerushalmi and Teres Kahanim, which is the Medrash, we learn Inui is from eating, from the Posuk Tanus Nefesh Seichem, that it is a tormentation, that it is within yourselves, and that is eating and drinking. It's not an outward thing, as the Rambam says, and not from a hekesh, making it similar to the words found regarding not doing work. However, in his explanation to the Mishnah Yuma, the Rambam writes that Gemara, and he says, Shem Yisborah said, when it comes to the punishment, the punishment is that soul should be lost from its people. And we have an accepted transmission from generation to generation that the soul, it refers to something that the soul is attached to, and that is eating and drinking. Meaning, like the Siach Yitzchak explained, that from this posuk we see that just like the punishment refers to the person's being, so too the torment that's required from nefesh is the person's being. Boy, and everyone who does fast on Yom Kippur, kiyem mitzvah aseh, he keeps the positive commandment. Shenema, and there are a few words missing over here. The words are, if somebody does eat and drink, he nullified a positive commandment, and he transgressed on the negative commandment. Shenema, any soul or person that shall not torment himself on this actual day, he will be cut off from the people of Israel. Since the Torah gave a punishment of cutting off Kores, somebody who did not torment himself, thus we see that we are warned on that day not to eat and drink. What does this mean? that is only on Ishkoris if you have a warning. There has to be in the Torah, Eloi says a negative commandment. You can't do it from a positive commandment. In the Gemara, increases 14a. There's a disagreement if there is Eruv Chatzeros, putting together courtyards and taking out from domain to domain on Yom Kippur, just like Shabbos, or there's no obligation to do so on Yom Kippur, because it's like Yom Tov, that you don't have an Isser of going beyond a certain point, and not an Isser of carrying from place to place. And the conclusion is that on it's called Shabbos, and therefore there is an obligation of making the courtyards an erev if you want to carry from one to the other. That's the Rambam's Halacha. The Maggid Mishnah there, they bring a machlokes from Masechta Erev in 31b, if there is an erev and Hoitzah b'Yom Kippur or not. The Halacha is, just like there's erev Hoitzah to Shabbos, so there's erev Hoitzah to Yom Kippur. And this is what the Rambam said, wherever you can't carry on Shabbos, you can't carry on Yom Kippur. Furthermore, there's another forbiddenness of muktzah, and there's also taking out from domain to domain. The Gra in Shulchan Aruch 611, regarding what we learned, that there's Eruv Tchumin on Yom Kippur, it says this is the lotion of the Rambam. Anything that you're not permitted to carry on Shabbos, to move on Shabbos, you're not allowed to move on Yom Kippur. Shagas Arya goes into it extensively if there is an obligation, forbiddenness to burn something on Yom Kippur. What's the question? Because there's a disagreement among the Tanoim why the Torah said Lo Yisabaru Eish B'chol Mishvasechem B'Yom HaShabbos. The forbiddenness of burning fire has its own specific commandment as opposed to the other malachas of Shabbos, and it's one of the 39 malachas. So one of the Tanoim is of the opinion that burning went out to tell you it's not skila, it's only a lav. That if you burn on Shabbos, you're not chayav misa, only malchus, only lashes. One of them says it came to tell you that you're liable for each and every one of the malachos of the 39 activities which are forbidden, even if you forgot about all 39 at one time. If you forgot that you're forbidden to do work, he's liable for each one, like for two, and therefore each one is separate. That's a machlokes. The Tosfos in Pesachim 5b writes, according to the one who was the opinion that for burning on Shabbos there is no penalty of death, only a penalty of lashes. On Yom Tov there's no isser of burning at all, because it's not called a malacha. The Shagas Ayah writes that according to this opinion, which is in Tosfos, in the understanding of that Tana, if I'm burning, there's no malacha, it's called a lav, it's not considered included in the 39 malachas that are related to Yom Kippur. And he concludes, as is his fashion, that certainly the Gemara accepted in every place that you can't burn fire on Yom Kippur. Not Torah, according to anyone, there's no one who permits it. Shagas Ayah then goes into the question of Machon. Machon is leading an animal that's carrying something. And regarding this halacha, or not having you, if your slave work or your animal work at Yom Kippur, is it the same as on Shabbos, the forbiddenness, or not? Because they're not in the malacha even on Shabbos. And after he goes at length in that question, he points out that the Rambam Yom Kippur writes that there's a forbiddenness to do this action of leading an animal that's carrying away, just like Shabbos. But regarding not having the animal and the slave do work, meaning that they shouldn't be found to be doing work, he's not sure. Because when you make it do work, it's one thing, but when it does it on its own, and after he concludes that even when Mechamer leading an animal is forbidden on Yom Kippur, because he's doing the melacha with the animal, whereas the Eved, if the slave or the animal or his animal does work by itself without the master telling it to do so, maybe you can't say it's also on Yom Kippur. Halacha, the Shagas is of the opinion that it is not forbidden on Yom Kippur, according to that Mandiyama who says that it doesn't take effect on Yom Tif as well. In Sefer Tales of Foil, the Green of Foil, Mivoloshin, and Tzlach and Brochas, they point out regarding the Shagas Ayah, and that Havora is forbidden on Yom Kippur because it says Shabbos Shabbos, and we learn from this that you have to rest from work, and therefore everything Havora is included. And you can't that question from the Mishnah and Megillah that it says there's no difference between Yom Kippur and Shabbos, that there's no difference at all, because the Mishnah is only referring to the forbiddenness of Melacha, because we find that you are permitted to prepare your vegetables on Yom Kippur, which is forbidden on Shabbos after Mincha. And at the end of the Shagas Ayah, who says that according to the one who is of the opinion that an animal working on Shabbos without his direction or his slave doing so is not forbidden on Yom Tif, by Yom Kippur it's not forbidden either, because Yom Tif is less stringent than Shabbos, so too Yom Kippur has its aspects where it's less stringent than Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva Eger questions if somebody who transgresses Yom Kippur publicly, now is he in the same category as somebody who transgresses Shabbos publicly or not, with all the limitations thereof? The Shulchan Aruch writes that if they wrote a get on Yom Kippur and Shabbos, the get has no validity. The divorce has no validity. Why? So it would seem because somebody who transgresses Yom Kippur Mefahesya, he is considered somebody who is invalidated from being an aid, and therefore the get is bottled. We were referring where one of the witnesses was somebody who transgresses Yom Kippur. Just Rabbi Akiva Eger questions the reason why Machal Shabbos is considered a mumma is because he does not believe in the fact that God created the world, like the Rashi writes in Chum 5a. That has nothing to do with Yom Kippur. Pri Megadim also questions this, and whether he's negated from being a witness, a valid witness. Only Shabbos, not Yom Kippur. In Sefer Simlo Chadosha, he brings what the Tuasher wants to prove that Yom Kippur is like Shabbos from the Hilchos Ibn Ezra, that a get that was written on Shabbos Yom Kippur, it's bottled in Torah because it has no validity. And Pri Megadim says that it's not because that what you do on Yom Kippur is a mumma to all of the Torah itself, but since Yom Kippur is very stringent in the eyes of the people, and he makes light of it, therefore we have to suspect that maybe it wasn't written properly, because we can't trust this fellow. He doesn't comprehend things. Now, according to question, is there a difference between work on Yom Kippur like Shabbos, meaning since there's 39 malachos in Shabbos, therefore every malach has a tolda, that they are similar to them, and they are also forbidden minat Torah. Meaning, do we say that we separate each and every one, or it's only one forbiddenness for everything? The Beis HaLevi writes that if we say we learn to differentiate between, to obligate for every single malacha a different penalty, and we learn it from fire, that's only by Shabbos. We don't find by Yom Kippur the separation. But if we learn the differentiation of malachas from the posuk me'achas me'heino, because there's as in Shabbos 70, it says since the posuk is not speaking regarding Shabbos, but just telling you the sins of people. You learn that each and every sin it has its own penalty. Therefore, there will be on Yom Kippur a separation of malachos, because you learn it from the posuk. It should say not, the word "lo" is extra here. It wasn't. It doesn't have to do with Shabbos. It's everything. It has its individual obligation of a chatos. But then the Rabbi Kiva goes on to write that it's possible that even if you learn Shabbos from Havara, not from the separation that each malachos has its own penalty, maybe you still learn that Yom Kippur has a separation of penalties. In the Shvisas Pano, he also goes into whether Yom Kippur is more stringent than Shabbos, because you can't eat and drink, which Shabbos does not have. And he concludes that Shabbos is more stringent because it has a separation of malachos. Each activity is forbidden, and the penalty is skilo, which is the death penalty by man, which is not the case of Yom Kippur. So you see from him, the Ma'am Pano, that he was the opinion that there's no separation of malachos by Yom Kippur. The Rambam's opinion in this we can prove from what he said in Halacha Beis, that whatever you're obligated for a chatas on Shabbos, you're chayiv on Yom Kippur. It would seem that he does feel that each and every activity which is forbidden on Shabbos applies to Yom Kippur as well, that is a separate penalty. But Yeshua in Shabbos proves from Hilchos Yom to the Rambam that he doesn't mention the separation of malachos on Yom Kippur. That he would feel that that on Yom Kippur you would only be liable one time for all the malachos. Rabbi Kiva goes extensively to prove that the idea that there's no separation on Yom Tov is not because Yom Tov is more lenient than Shabbos, but rather because we didn't learn the difference of malachos from malchus from the idea of chatos. And therefore, Yom Kippur, there would be also a separation regarding chatos, but not for malchus. Interesting situation where for every malacha that you do, you would you'd be liable to bring a chatos if you do it unintentionally. But if you do it intentionally, you only get one malchus for all the transgression of all the malachos on Yom Kippur. The later commentaries are of the opinion that only on Yom Tov all the malachos are one unit. You don't receive malchus on every specific malacha, if they warn them each time, of course. Whereas the obligation of chatos on Yom Kippur, there is a separation of malachos. Just that if somebody does a malacha on Shabbos that has no obligation of malchus, because the lav was loisasik malacha b'Shabbos, it has with it, you don't get malchus because you might get death penalty. However, the negative commandment of Yom Kippur that has no death penalty, but rather only chorus being cut off rather than death penalty, if they warned him they shouldn't do a malacha Yom Kippur, he is liable for malchus, which would not be the case on Shabbos. Now they go into the question, if we say that just like there's a separation of chatas for each malacha on Yom Kippur, so there's a shiur of malachos Yom Kippur. If you did many of them intentionally so Yom Kippur, with one warning, would you be chayav many malchus or not? Because regarding chatos, they're separate, so you have to do each one separately. Or since in malchus you only get ones, so would you be liable with one warning a few times malchus? Rabbi Kiva in Shvisas, where he discusses where it says v'zeh, he writes that the differentiation between each and every forbidden act on Yom Kippur is regarding chatos, and shoygig. You learn from the posuk me'achas meheno, which is a posuk that we learned has to do with chatas. It doesn't have to do with malchus. But for malchus Yom Kippur, it's equivalent to Yom Tov. There's no difference. You would only get that all that we learned that is a differentiation of malchus Yom Kippur is from achas meheno. Therefore, by malchus Yom Kippur will be similar to Yom Tov, that you only receive malchus once, not for each action that he did. And therefore, it would be different than Shabbos with regard to Malchus. But in Shabbos there's no Malchus because there's a death penalty.